Special Prosecutor Larry Clayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth, for competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty, for the Republic.
I'm the guy who at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Clayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Clayman. I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Obviously, it's a difficult period of time in a number of respects, not just with regard to COVID-19 and the ongoing pandemic, but of course, the likelihood that Biden and Harris will be occupying the White House very soon, bringing all of the radical leftists into our government to infest our body politic with radical leftist communist ideology. That's the sad part of it. Now, I do have later on in this show, on the third segment, Dr. Judy Mikovits. He's going to explain the risks of these vaccines. You're not getting the truth, obviously. And actually, that was one of the Achilles heel of President Trump. He relied on Dr. Anthony Fauci, although not on this show, but Dr. Mikovits has talked about her involvement with him before. She worked with him in the Fort Detrick lab in Maryland, the same lab that sent the seeds of COVID-19 over to the Wuhan Communist Chinese lab, which was released and obviously turned into a bioweapon, destroying this country and most of the world. But today she's going to talk about the risks of the vaccines. And I want you to listen carefully because, frankly, as I've said many times, the one thing that the left and right can agree on is that you can't believe a word that comes out of the government. And, of course, these companies, these big companies, Pfizer and Moderna, they want to make money. So that's their motivation. But I want to get to a more spiritual message right now in this first segment. I wrote a column. You can find it at WND.com, also in freedomwatchusa.org. It's titled, If It's Good Enough for Jesus, It's Good Enough for Me. And I talk about my history in coming to Christ and how my grandfather, Isidore Clayman, a young boy who escaped from the Ukraine. Of course, he thought it was Russia at the time. It was after the Bolsheviks took over Russia in 1917. He came a few years later. His dad, Meyer Clayman, came earlier, worked for Armour and Company in Philadelphia as a meat packer, as a butcher, saved money, and sent for his young son and his daughter and his wife, who I used to call Bubba Razel, because she didn't even speak English. She spoke Yiddish and Russian, I remember, when I was a very young boy. But I have fond memories of my grandfather because when he came through Ellis Island on his way to the United States for entry, the immigration officer asked him, "What's your birthday?" He said, "I don't know. They don't keep records where I came from. I don't really know what my birthday is, but if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me." And he took December 25th as his birthday. Of course, that was somewhat of a sacrifice. It meant that, he didn't have 2 days to get presents, okay? But he believed in Jesus, although he was a very proud Jew and at one point wanted to be a rabbi. Instead, he started a grocery store where he helped people out that were poor. He would hand food out even during the Great Depression. And later, a pork packing plant where he partnered with my father, Herman Clayman, and my uncle, Benny Clayman. It grew into a very profitable enterprise. They used to slaughter 5,000 hogs a day by the time it ended, thanks to the wage price freeze of that moron, Alan Greenspan, who worked for President Nixon at the time, who put on a wage price freeze, which meant that the price that my family could buy hogs from farmers was not fixed, but the price that they could sell to chain stores and retailers was. It drove them out of business. But that being said, when I would go to lunch with my grandfather on breaks at the pork plant, because I was a teenage butcher, and I would work there very proudly. I had my white hat, I had my knives, I had, mesh gloves so I couldn't cut my fingers off when I was cutting meat. I was very proud. I used to get up at 2 a.m. in the morning in the summertime and go to work and work in the meat plant with the workers. And the fact is that toughened me up as a person. But my lodestar was my grandfather. He was a very, very ethical and moral man. And the fact that he believed in Jesus caused me intellectually to believe in Jesus. I asked him once when we were at lunch at Horn and Hardest Restaurant, which is where we would always go in Northeast Philadelphia, do you think that Jesus is the Son of God? And he said, grandson, God can do whatever he wants. I don't doubt it. And for Judy to say that was quite remarkable, particularly at that time. And then later in my life, very hard periods that I've gone through, and I've gone through hard periods like everybody has, Jesus came to me and he actually spoke to me in thoughts. And I know it was him. And the last time he spoke to me was also the second time in a very difficult period where I was driving down the road after I had almost died in a car crash. I had a concussion, the car was totaled, and I had just lost a case on behalf of a friend, which we should have won, but the judge is extremely corrupt. And I write about it in my new book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. It's Judge Colleen Kohler-Catelli of the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia, just one of many compromised and corrupt judges on the federal bench. But I was saying to myself, Larry, you're a revolutionary. I said, Jesus was a revolutionary too. I was trying to make myself feel better. And all of a sudden, he came to me again. He had come to me 10 years earlier in a Catholic church when I was standing there with my first wife and young kids at the time. And he said to me, Larry, you can accept me. We were fighting Clinton. It was a difficult period of time. My grandmother, Yetta, had just died. It divided the family. But he came to me yet again, the second time. And he said, you're not like me. You're not going to pay the ultimate price, but you will pay a price. But I just want you to know, keep doing what you're doing, and I am with you. I will always be with you. And it cleared out my head, because there was a lot of stuff that was in my head, and we don't have enough time to discuss it really at this point. But this is something that has stuck with me. And it's very important that you understand my experience, because if you open your heart, he will come to you as well. Jesus and the Father will come to you. And during these very difficult days, when it seems that the country is collapsing, when it in fact is collapsing unless we do something about it, and that's why I wrote my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, which you can get at Amazon.com. I'm not going to make money. I do push the book because I want people to read it, because it gives a roadmap as to how we can wage that peaceful and legal revolution and take the country back from the evil forces that infest the executive branch of government, the legislative branch of government, and particularly the federal judiciary. But that's something that we need to keep in mind, is that God is with us, and that if we help ourselves, if we get up off the couch and we turn off cable news, shows like Hannity, and I'm talking obviously to conservatives and libertarians. A few liberals listen to the show since gives them a chance to take shots at me. I usually get emails after this, particularly from this guy, Robert Berger, who's a real clown. But the fact is that we are his servants, and we can rise up again. And if you go back and you read the Declaration of Independence, perhaps the most beautiful document ever written short of the Bible, where it starts, and I've said this before, when in the course of human events, the government breaks away from the people and no longer represents the people have a God-given right under the laws of nature and nature's God to alter or abolish their form of government and to start a new government by and for the people with inalienable rights for everyone in pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. And if you read that Declaration of Independence, you see how much the divine providence of God is inserted into that document, and how when we move on, when we wage this peaceful and legal revolution, because if we don't succeed, as Thomas Jefferson predicted, we will go into a violent revolution. It won't be Larry Clayman who advocates that. But when Biden and Harris come for the guns of the people, that's going to ignite it. And it's something that we want to try to avoid. So I want you to keep that in mind this holiday season, because it's very, very important that you realize, just like our founding fathers, that God and his Son are with us. But he's only with us If, like our founding fathers, we take matters into our own hands, if we just sit there and pontificate and watch shows like Sean Hannity, who promise things that are never going to happen to get viewers to come back to enrich himself and to enrich Fox News, then we're going nowhere. Same applies for Newsmax. Newsmax, which now claims it's the Trump News Network, is run by Christopher Ruddy, who gave $1 million to the Clinton Foundation. A two-faced hypocrite. And that's the nicest thing you could say. Don't rely on these people. They don't tell the truth. They give you false hope. They don't allow the American people to understand that they have to get up off the couch and do it for themselves. President Trump was never the political messiah. Even if he won, it would have only been for 4 years. This downward slide would have continued. And there's no way that he's going to be president on January 20th. I wish that he was, but God wants us to do it for ourselves right now. And we have to move on. And maybe he's telling us something with Biden and Harris. He's telling us that now we face the prospect of a violent revolution. You've got radicals of every single group, radical blacks, radical Marxian Jews of the left, radical atheists, radical Muslims, radical feminists, radicals, gays, lesbians, and transgenders. They're all banding together to take this country apart. And when they do, there'll be nothing left. And then they'll start fighting with each other like the Bolsheviks did with the white and red Russians after the Russian Revolution. So this is my message, my Christmas message. Where is hope? Because if we put our faith in God and his son, he will be with us. Just as Jesus said to me, Larry, keep it going. You work for me now. That cleared my head out. It's why I'll take risks. It's why I'll do things that other people won't do. And now you have to think about that too, because unless we rise up, we will not have a country any longer. I'll be right back with the second segment of Special Prosecutor with Larry Clayman. Stay tuned and get my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, at Amazon.com.
Fearless.
He's claiming he's crazy, he's racist, he's out to kill the Democrats.
Dangerous.
You don't care, he uses the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad,
Special Prosecutor
very bad.
Larry Clayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
One of the things that I'm trying to get you to understand, and I've said this over and over and over again, is that there is no political Messiah. There's only one Messiah. His name is Jesus. And there's only one Father. His name is Yahweh, or whatever you want to call him. As my grandfather used to say, some people drive Lincolns, other people drive Cadillacs. The idea is to get to the same destination. And our destination is to save our country and to preserve the vision and creation of our founding fathers. Now, one of the things you got to keep in mind is that nobody's perfect. President Trump did a lot of good things for his 4 years, but his time has come and his time has passed. There will be others that will come on the horizon in the future, leaders of this country, who will take his place. And hopefully when they do take his place, they'll do it in a different way. And I hearken back, for instance, to Ronald Reagan, who was our greatest president, at least in my lifetime. I was born in 1951 and have seen some terrible presidents. I mean, it's amazing we've survived with some of the presidents that we've had. I've talked about Nixon before. He was one of our better presidents by default, even though he bankrupted my family. But Reagan was somebody who had class, somebody who could communicate with very firm ideas, with conviction, with all segments of the people. President Reagan was someone who hung around good people, good, moral, solid people. And if President Trump had an Achilles heel, and in fact, I believe that even with all the massive fraud, and there was massive fraud, and we know that the judiciary wouldn't address that. That's what I wrote about long before this election scandal, this massive fraud in my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. Jefferson predicted that federal judges, unelected and unaccountable to the people, would become despots and tyrants, such that every 20 years or so, we would have to rise up and wage another bloody revolution. And then he added, what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty? Well, we don't want to see that. But the judges obviously failed the president. Even his own Supreme Court picks threw him under the bus, saving their own skin to keep their standing in the Washington legal establishment, which establishment, by the way, the legal establishment, is the most corrupt of any profession in the United States. And I can tell you that after 43 years. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that in a happy way, because this is what I've spent my life doing, is dealing with the vermin, frankly, in the legal profession, whether it's with judges, whether it's with bar associations, whether it's with others. Not all bar associations. Florida Bar and the Texas Bar are good, but the DC Bar Association is evil, and they want to destroy anybody who isn't a leftist. But President Trump never helped himself. And if he had acted in a different way, even with the fraud, it's my view that he would have been reelected. But his biggest problem was to hang around people, frankly, who were scum. SCUM. And I'm talking about people like Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, and others. And just this week, he pardoned Stone. And Stone is now out there saying, oh, now I can sue Mueller and I can sue, the government and all this other stuff. You know what? This is why you don't get the truth on Fox News. Tucker Carlson, who was a shill for Stone for whatever reason. Tucker's not even a conservative. I know going back years when I used to do Crossfire, and he was one of the hosts, he would criticize me for bringing lawsuits for Bill Clinton. He's the one who first wrote the first hit piece concerning me because he was working for Time magazine. He's two-faced. He's a lot like Chris Ruddy. And one reason reason I bring this out, it's not to take shots at people, but people like Roger Stone are what dragged this president down, is that when you hang around excrement, you start to smell like it. And for him to be pardoning him and Paul Manafort, maybe give Manafort clemency. Okay, he's been in jail quite a while. His health is not good. I understand that. But to say he's got a pardon, but a pardon doesn't mean that your criminal conviction is erased. It's not. It's just that you get certain of your rights back. And in fact, in Stone's case, we have 6 lawsuits pending because he defamed Dr. Jerome Corsi and me because he feared that Corsi was going to tell the truth before the Mueller grand jury and his criminal prosecution. And we therefore had to protect my client and protect me. And the fact that Stone was convicted of 7 felony counts will come in to the ultimate trial in those cases, and that does bear on one's credibility because Stone was convicted for lying to the federal government. It's relevant. So I say this because anybody that now occupies a vacuum, anybody who thinks that we need to be able to do what we need to do has to have that moral and ethical character. I'll be right back with Dr. Judy Mikovits.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Clayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
I'm back with Dr. Judy Mikovits, my friend, my colleague, my client, a very brave woman, a scientist who worked with Dr. Anthony Fauci at the Fort Detrick Laboratory. We've talked about that before. She's the author of Plague of Corruption. Her co-author is Ken Heckenlively, also a very courageous man who stands up to the political correctness, frankly, and nonsense that you hear out there in the media. I want to get her take on these vaccines, where it's leading us. She thinks it's going to create new orders that we take them voluntarily. But in terms of our health, I want people to understand what the risks are of these vaccines. Judy, Merry Christmas to you and your family. Thank you for coming on, Special Prosecutor with Larry Clayman.
Merry Christmas, Larry. Good morning. These are certainly interesting times, and yes, these COVID-19 vaccine candidates are not only not going to stop any kind of transmission of these viruses, but are in effect going to be very dangerous for a significant percentage of the population.
Tell us what significant population would be put in danger by this.
In particular, ethnic minorities. Racially, the African Americans, Latinos, that the NIH leadership is encouraging to participate in these clinical trials are, in fact, the most susceptible. We're being told to injury by the vaccines. We're being told that the virus is impacting the African American population and Hispanics 2 to 5 more times than it does the Caucasian part of our country. And in fact, viruses don't know whether you're what color you are or what your culture is. It's really because the immune systems of people's of different populations and cultures are adapted to their environments, and so these are very dangerous because of the antiviral responses, the responses of African Americans and Hispanics to RNA viruses are less efficient than Caucasian people in several of the most important pathways for stopping damage by a coronavirus infection by way of this cytokine storm.
What is it about the cultural upbringing of these two groups that makes them more susceptible? Why is their immune system, I guess, less strong than white people?
Yeah, it's weaker in part, but the structure of the virus, it's the type 1 interferon pathway, because people in and their vitamin D response pathways are quite different in these populations. It's not their upbringing; it's the immune compromise, because they're not exposed. They're more exposed to parasites and have what are called Th2 and other kinds of responses. So, in fact, we found that people with the RNases actually degrade RNA in the blood. It's just like a Pac-Man that degrades everything. Well, blacks and Hispanics have a lower amount, 50% less ability to degrade RNA viruses just by the nature of a single change in that enzyme, which is different in these populations. So it's really simply a matter of biology, which one size doesn't fit all and never has with respect to populations and vaccines. And that's why we see the injury in some populations more than others. What
about this new strain of COVID-19 that they say is coming from England? What's that all about?
Well, I'm sorry, it's not at all funny, but there are going to be new strains. There are, in fact, hundreds of strains of coronaviruses in the cell line, the Vero monkey kidney cells, called Vero E6. This is the manufacturing plant, if you will. It's the manufacturing cultures, continuously growing cell lines that have been used around the world for decades to grow these coronaviruses. And we know from a 2011 Journal of Virology paper that there are dozens of coronaviruses, along with gamma retroviruses, the XMRVs, which was our discovery shown that those were being introduced. These are gamma retroviruses that encode in their envelope protein a very dangerous it's called syncytin, and it's an ancient viral gene that our immune systems that were critical to the evolution of primate immune system. But in fact, if they're expressed inappropriately. It's not the presence of a virus, it's the expression of the virus. And when they're expressed, they can cause multiple sclerosis, brain injury through that very same cytokine storm. And even the envelope protein alone was shown to be to contribute to much more aggressive breast, prostate cancers, and other leukemia and lymphoma, to which, again, blacks and Hispanics have been known in our world, in our research for decades at the National Cancer Institute, to be more likely to get aggressive cancer because of the aberrant, the wrongful expression of this syncytin, it's called, gamma retrovirus protein, that is in fact being introduced in the RNA. This is what is introduced in the Moderna and other vaccines as the surface protein. So you've got HIV surface protein, GP120, you've got XMRV and syncytin, and you've got the ACE2 receptors all co-expressed and being introduced into every cell of the body, and this will make more populations more susceptible to HIV. In fact, a paper came out in October in the Lancet by scientists back from HIV, knowing the work with the HIV vaccine, where they use these adenovirus vectors as shuttle vectors. You have to introduce RNA into the cell, into the body this way, and they're packaged in these dangerous lipid nanoparticles using polyethylene glycol, which 70% of America will make an immune response, an anaphylactic response, which could be deadly to that PEG protein. So everything about these vaccines are going to be deadly to the most susceptible populations, and in fact to everyone. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that in the first rounds of healthcare workers who are, fainting, the development of Bell's palsy, the development of multiple sclerosis. That was seen in one of the trials. And they said, oh, that's unrelated. She had that anyway, or he had that anyway. And in fact, the papers for all the way back from 2004, and our colleagues show that expression of that gamma retrovirus gene, syncytin, alone can cause multiple sclerosis.
Judy, is there a vaccine which is less dangerous than the other, let's say the Pfizer versus the Moderna?
Well, right now there's really not. The Pfizer vaccine is a thermostable, meaning heat-stable mRNA vaccine. And see, in nature, these RNA viruses, any RNA in the blood breaks down very quickly, as I mentioned, by these RNases. So these are enzymes which literally are like Pac-Man that degrade and chew up any viral RNA, because it's the viral RNA in the blood that is the danger signal. So now the Pfizer has been made into a thermostable, meaning it doesn't break down as easily. So now you're expressing these pathogenic surface proteins that in many trials with this same type of vaccine, back with HIV, back in the mid around 2007, those trials by Merck and that would be AstraZeneca too, in the adenovirus vector vaccines will make you more susceptible to HIV and AIDS development. So these and we'll see deadly diseases that we associated with the XMRV, the gamma retrovirus expression, just as we showed back in 2011. So this has been known for literally 2 decades since these types of vaccines have been in animal trials, and in fact, all of the small primates in some of these studies literally died, all of them. And the Pfizer chairman said, we're not sure somebody can transmit after the vaccination. And in fact, there's no evidence that there are neutralizing antibodies, that the expression of these deadly surface proteins can in fact block transmission of the virus. So these are not vaccines at all. They don't have, and they can sterilize the syncytin protein, that gamma retrovirus envelope is important for a placenta to bind to the uterus, so it's expressed to the cell wall. Syncytia means fusion of cells, and so the expression of these proteins cause fusion of cells. So young women and men can be sterilized by these vaccines by the inappropriate expression of Syncytia at the wrong place and time. And again, all of these vaccines are expressing these deadly RNAs and proteins in every cell of the body by way of a dangerous lipid nanoparticle containing that PEG that 70% of America will have an anaphylactic and autoimmune response to that could be deadly.
Judy, how long do you think COVID-19 is going to be hanging around? I've talked to my doctors. I have good doctors, and they're not with your level of expertise in virology, but they think this is going to be around for years, that we're going to have to be ordered, not have to be, but we will be ordered to wear masks for that period, and that there'll be very little impact in terms of our daily lifestyle, given the way these draconian orders are coming out of governors and mayors and everybody else. And now, of course, we've got Biden and Harris on the horizon to occupy the White House to make it a national type order. What's your take on how long we're going to be living under this, shall we say, lack of freedom?
Well, coronaviruses have been around for millions of years. We've co-evolved with coronaviruses, retroviruses, as I just mentioned, the gamma retrovirus envelope in primate evolution, millions of years. These viruses have co-evolved. It's the common cold, and of course, when we engineer them and we use that those monkey cells to spread the virus around the world by way of polio vaccines. This is the same cell line. We grow polio vaccines in every year. Yes, you'll have a new strain every day, and again, everything about them will be deadly. The masks drive disease as you suppress those very type 1 interferon responses. So in effect, the masks and level the playing field. They make the healthy Caucasians just as susceptible to disease as the Hispanics and African Americans who are not wearing masks, hopefully. But again, the masks are driving the disease. The lockdowns are driving the disease. There's natural herd immunity. We always have natural immunity. And again, the trials were run in such a way that they didn't test for immunity prior. They didn't test for antibodies prior. And we know from the earlier trials with SARS and MERS that if you already have an antibody to these viruses, you can get something called antibody-dependent enhancement. So you literally
Judy, we've got 15 seconds left. Tell us where they can get your new book. You've been really helpful in getting people to understand the truth here. You got a new book coming out.
Our new book is called Ending Plague, A Scholar's Obligation in an Age of Corruption, and that's available for pre-order right now on Amazon, and will be available at major book sites.
Thank you for everything you do, Judy. God bless you. My privilege to be your lawyer and your friend.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Clayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
Here's the verdict, fellow patriots, people who want this country to continue, is that we need to rise up, and we need to think about it this Christmas and this holiday period. We know that God and his Son will be with us if we rise up. I was giving you my own personal testimony on that. And it's very important for all of us to associate with the right people, not to associate with con men, criminals, and crooks. These were the people that occupied the temple in ancient Hebraic days. And it was Jesus and the Father who ultimately destroyed that temple, destroyed civilizations, and then brought them back. The people of Israel ultimately came back to the promised land. But in the interim, God taught them a lesson that we cannot forget. And that is why, as we move forward into the new year, I want you to read what I wrote in my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, which you can get at Amazon.com. I want you to reflect. I want you to realize that we're not here alone, that this is a cycle which many civilizations have gone through. We now have radical leftist barbarians, not at our gates, but inside of our gates. They are now going to occupy the White House. They are bringing with them vile leftists like those that work for George Soros, radicals of every group, color, creed, and so-called religion. Of course, some of these are not really religions, they're cults. But we must remember that we have to do it for ourselves, just like the ancient Hebrews did, just like Moses did, wandering the desert for 40 years, finding the promised land. He didn't sit there watching Fox News and Sean Hannity. He was looking for the promised land. We have to look for the promised land. And we have to do it with people that we can trust, not people that will stab us in the back. And these federal judges, for instance, that the president appointed, he didn't know who he was appointing. He was appointing people that were recommended to him by slimy Republican lobbyists, and we see what happened with that. Lower court judges and Supreme Court justices stabbed him in the back like Brutus. This is something which we need to remember. So who you hang around with, as I just said in the last segment of Special Prosecutor, the second segment today, is that who you hang around with is very, very important. You don't want to hang around with people like Roger Stone. We need good people. We need Gideon's armies. We need people to rise up and to fight for the vision and creation of our founding fathers. And we must do it peacefully and legally at first. If that doesn't work, others will take matters into their own hands. And this spring, I'm going to call a Third Continental Convention in Philadelphia, my birthplace and the birthplace of liberty. And I want people to participate. We're going to get experts from everywhere. Because if we cannot straighten things out right now, we need to alter or abolish our form of government and form a new government by and for the people. Our founding fathers did it. Charles de Gaulle did it in World War II when the Nazis took over France. He ran France from London. And we can do it ourselves. I frankly do not recognize the presidency of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They do not represent the American people. This was a fraudulent election, but we have to remember that President Trump was no political messiah. He had his weaknesses. If he had behaved in a different way, he probably would have been reelected even with the fraud that was committed against him and the American people. So we must rise up. You know, in the old book of Isaiah, God looks to the counselors and judges to restore the faithful city from the tarnished city. And that's what we have to do now. I wouldn't be looking for lawyers and judges to do it because that's proven to be part of the problem, in fact, the biggest problem. But I'd be looking to you to do it. And I hope to work with you in the coming year to get you to understand that we must associate with good people. We must have a citizens' army that believes in peaceful and legal means to reform this country in the vision of our founding fathers, because it's already sadly perverted by the forces of the left, by the forces of our education system that have become, frankly, corrupt. And we will succeed because he and his son are with us. And that's my message this week. Take it to heart. Read about it in my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. Tell me what you think. Send me an email at leclayman@gmail.com. We're all in it together. I want to bless you, and I want to bless your family. It's actually God that's doing it, not me. But you stay safe. We will prevail. I promise you, we will prevail. I'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Clayman.
This year has us all wanting to be healthier, and that includes our eye health. But how do you get vision coverage if you're retiring? It's actually pretty easy. VSP, the vision coverage many people get through work, offers individual vision plans. Enroll anytime, on any device, and start using your benefits the same day. You don't need to be an employee to get employee-level vision coverage. Visit VSPDirect.com today. That's VSPDirect.com.